The backstep is one of the most important moves you need to master, and it is more important to learn it now in Sunbreak than in the base game. There are two main reasons why you should use the backstep. First, the backstep has about 2/3 of a second worth of invincibility frames, which is very generous. This gives us another option to dodge monsters' attacks besides rolling or outspacing. Sometimes, backstepping may be your easiest option or perhaps even your only option to dodge an attack, thanks to the amount of iframes you get. And in some cases, it's actually more optimal to backstep through some attacks since you can get better punishes out of it. And second, the backstep will be the main way to access Perfect Rush. Sure, you can use the guard point of Guard Slash to access Perfect Rush as well, but it's not very reliable unless you build for Guard 5, so for the most part, backstep into Perfect Rush it is. Now let's talk about all the different ways you can perform the backstep. I'll be referring to the Switch default controls when talking about inputs, so if you're playing with a different controller, you'll just have to do the translation yourself. The first way to backstep is by pressing A while holding back on the left stick after almost any move. This is useful for when you need to dodge an attack while mid-combo, or when you need to double backstep, which I'll talk about later. The second way to backstep is by pressing A during a roll. And specifically during a forwards roll, you can additionally hold a direction on the left stick while pressing A to back up facing that direction. Sometimes backstepping after a roll can come in handy when trying to avoid attacks, but for the most parts, backstepping after a roll is useful for quickly repositioning yourself for Perfect Rush. The third way is by pressing A while holding back on the left stick after a switch skill swap evade. I can't really see how this method is useful, especially since you shouldn't be swapping too often with the sword and shield anyways, but it's included here for completion's sake. And the fourth way is by pressing A and back on the left stick while guarding. This may be the most difficult method to perform the backstep, but it's actually the most useful method. So if you're new to the sword and shield, you'll probably have to practice this in the training area for a little bit. If you are struggling to execute this, then here are some tips. Even though the game tells you to press A and back on the left stick at the same time, don't actually try to press them at the same time. What may end up happening is that you'll perform a guard slash in the opposite direction, which is very far from ideal. Instead, you should press A first and then quickly afterwards, press back on the left stick. If you input the left stick too early, then you'll guard slash behind you like before. And if you input the left stick too late, then you'll guard slash in front of you. So hopefully pressing A then back as opposed to pressing them simultaneously will make your backsteps more consistent. Another way of trying to make backsteps more consistent involves the directional control settings. By default, the inputs on the left stick are relative to the direction the camera is facing. But back on the left stick always refers to the direction the character is facing. So in Type 1, if you are facing away from the camera, back on the left stick means down on the left stick. But if I'm facing towards the camera, back on the left stick means up on the left stick. However, in Type 2, inputs on the left stick are not relative to the direction the character is facing, and thus back on the left stick will always be down on the left stick. This is worth mentioning since sometimes you may need to backstep at some awkward camera angles, and changing to Type 2 will always make your back inputs down. There are probably some players out there who use Type 2 to specifically make these backsteps more consistent. For me personally, I don't really like Type 2, but if you're finding Type 2 better for more consistent backsteps, then go for it. We are still not done with this method though, because it turns out that you don't need to be holding guard for that long in order to perform any action from guard, the backstep included. In fact, you can perform the backstep from guard so fast that it doesn't even look like you guarded at all. This is what I like to call the instant backstep, since you are basically performing the backstep instantaneously, and it is why backstepping can be so good at dodging attacks. Now it gets even better than this because you don't even need to have your weapon out to instant backstep. Since you can guard while sheathed, that means you can instant backstep from sheath as well. Again, I highly suggest that you go in the training area to practice all the different methods of backstepping. But now that you know how to backstep, what can we follow up with? First, if you don't press or hold anything after performing a backstep, you will automatically do an advancing slash or sliding slash depending on which switch skill you have equipped. And it can be angled to the left or right with the left stick. I personally recommend the advancing slash over sliding slash since sliding slash is just too awkward to handle, but use whatever you want. If you continue to hold back on the left stick after a backstep, you'll do a rising slash in place. It's not too spectacular offensively, but you can backstep again after a rising slash, and this is what I like to call a double backstep. Now there's this thing in Sunbreak where some monsters will perform the same attack twice in a row when enraged or in a powered up state. And for most cases you can double backstep through both attacks. Not the most optimal thing to do sometimes, but it's pretty cool to pull off. If you continue to hold A after the backstep, you'll begin charging up for a Charge Slash. Now Charge Slash wasn't that great in the base game, and unfortunately it hasn't been buffed at all during the making of this video, so it's not really worth using most of the time, and honestly not worth talking about in this video. And last but certainly not least, if you press X during the backstep, you'll perform the Perfect Rush. Now Perfect Rush isn't the best DPS combo for the Sword and Shield, but it's still decently powerful and does provide good utility like preserving sharpness, dealing stun damage, and building up mount damage. It's definitely more useful in Sunbreak than in base Rise, so let's talk about it. The angle and distance you travel for Perfect Rush 1, also known as Leaping Slash, can be adjusted 6 ways. Leaving a left stick neutral is the normal distance you travel for Perfect Rush 1, holding left or right will angle you to the left or right respectively, holding forward makes you travel farther forward, and holding forward left or forward right makes you travel farther and angle to the left and right respectively. For Perfect Rush 2, 3, and 4, you must press the button at the right timing for maximum damage. The timing is pretty generous though, and you can actually press a little earlier than what the game tries to tell you through its visual, audio, and controller rumble cues. However, in some cases like trying to Perfect Rush Anjanath's Flailing Head, you may also want to consider delaying the timing just so you can get the hit in. If you manage to land Perfect Rush 4, you'll automatically perform a Scaling Slash. You should almost always follow up with Falling Bash unless you need to come down quickly, then use Plunging Thrust instead. And if you don't have enough time for Perfect Rush 4, you can instead press A to finish with the Spinning Reaper. It's not optimal, but it's better than overcommitting and getting hit. That is all I have for this video. If there's something you wanted to add, then feel free to leave a comment down below. Like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you aren't already subscribed, and I'll see you next time.